All right. Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, collaborative partners, and welcome again to our 2020 TCOM Cloud Gathering Conference. My name is April Fernando. I'm the Associate Director of Workforce Development at the Center for Innovation and Population Health at the University of Kentucky. It's so nice to have all of you join us for our 16th annual TCOM conference. And while this is the official start to our conference, many of you have already participated in our pre-conference programs, and I'd like to thank all of our pre-conference presenters for their inspiring words and their energetic discussions. They've set a really high bar for the rest of the conference. Our cloud conference this year, like so many other things in our current lives, is a first. It's the first time we get to peek into your everyday life, to see your workspace, to meet your cats, to hear your dogs and your children, all via a little Zoom square. It's the first time we've had to connect via chat or the Socio app, rather than bumping into each other outside the ballroom or at the bar. This year, we're gathered together virtually, remotely, and safely distanced because of the COVID-19 pandemic that's still raging across our world, and the pandemic has been hard on all of us. I know that when people of our communities hit hard times, you all are hit hard personally as well. And yet you are all part of the critical network of support that keeps our communities alive, hopeful, and moving forward. I know that all of you are in overdrive right now, innovating, collaborating with each other to find ways to deliver care while keeping yourselves and others safe. I know that your concern for the people you've committed your lives to care for has increased exponentially, as have your efforts to help as we consider ways to connect to those sequestered alone and separate from their families, and we contemplate the safety of children, youth, and adults in our communities who may be living in circumstances that are less than ideal with limited means to reach out for support. And I know that many here today have lost friends, loved ones, colleagues, and neighbors to this virus. Let's take a moment to reflect on the 1.29 million people across the world who've lost their lives to this virus, and let's honor them with just a moment of silence. We're grateful that you're taking the time to be with us today. I hope you'll find the connection with each other through our sessions invigorating, energizing, nourishing, and also fun. Thanks to all of you presenters and attendees for giving of yourself, your time, and as John Lyons always says, thank you for all that you do for others. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers this morning, Drs. Jay Africa and Michael Cull. I hope you take time to read their bios on the Socio app. If you do, you will read about individuals whose careers reflect their passions of caring for others and their tireless work to make our systems and workforce better equipped and better able to support our communities. Our first speaker is Dr. Jay Africa. Dr. Africa is the Director of Behavioral Health and Recovery Services in Marin County, California. I had the pleasure of meeting Jay while he was still in graduate school and have watched him grow as a professional and seen the tremendous impact that he's had as a psychologist, an activist, and a Filipino in California. Dr. Africa will be speaking on emerging from the crisis, radical hope, justice, and love.
So good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today. Let me try to share my screen. When I was really thinking about what I would be wanting to talk about today is really, given all the things that sort of are happening in this world, really, what do we need to create some sense of, I think, hopefulness? And so I wanted my talk to talk about what we can do, what we can do. But before I do that, I want to really just acknowledge that the county that I'm in, where I'm at, sits upon the Miwok or coastal Miwok, Ohlone, and Great and Interior occupied land. Unless you're an indigenous person in this country, in the United States, that many of us are actually occupying stolen land. And I wanted to sort of acknowledge that. And if you were probably, hopefully not asleep, that you know that in the United States in the last week or so, we were in this very important event that really would determine sort of our history. We had sort of the presidential elections on Tuesday, and still now the results are being contested. And what really tells us about this that really America is divided, but most importantly, what it tells you is America is still deeply racist. Now, when I talk about that, when I talk about sort of the impact of that, it really makes me think about what we can do as a nation to really heal ourselves. And for me, now that as we are hopefully finishing counting the ballots and figuring out who's the next president, it's what I think the biggest issue now is how to heal ourselves. In addition to just what's happening in this country, I also wanted to just sort of acknowledge the many global crises that we are all facing. And as Dr. Fernandez said, about 1.29 million people have died from COVID, and about 52.3 million cases of COVID still exist. In terms of climate change, for example, the past decade has been the warmest recorded in the history of the world, with our deadly wildfires, our hurricanes, extreme weather events, the ice cap melting, the sea level rising. And it's actually speculated that almost 1 million animals and plants will be extinct if we do not do anything in the next decade or so. In terms of poverty, right, we know that half a billion people will experience or be in extreme poverty by the year 2030. Half a billion people will be in extreme poverty by 2030. And that 80% of those folks who will be living in extreme poverty have been affected in sort of conflict affected countries, which is actually the next global crisis that we are facing. Many of our countries or many of around the world is in a state of conflict and war. And that lethal violence and violent crime, specifically women and children, are being disproportionately affected by these violence across the globe. And as a matter of fact, because of the impact of war and conflict, we have about 60% of food insecure people will actually be affected by this conflict. So it's not just war and violence, it's really about all the sustainable impact that impact people in terms of how they live. We know, though, that the number of refugees around the globe is increasing, and that really affects, how the health and well-being of people. According to some prediction, 1 out of 45 on this planet will need help and protection in the next year. 1 out of 45 individuals, and that in this year, to about there will be 170 million people over 50 countries that will be affected by war and conflict. And then the last one, which is really sort of one that I often think about, is how much inequality and exclusion has affected us in general. And you might be a person that probably feels like I'm not quite affected, but everybody is actually affected by injustice and inequality. So much to say that there was a study that came out that the unequal distribution of health, education, and living standard really affects everybody. And unless we figure out a way to address that, um, all of us will be continued to be affected. The World Economic Forum has calculated, and this was really staggering for me, that it will take women uh, almost about 100 years to achieve gender equality. It will take, again, I'm going to say that again, about 100 more years for women to achieve gender equality. And yet we have been slowly trying to work on this, and still, there's still a lot of work to do. So the question for me, and I've been asked, like, is there any hope? Because it really just feels like we're really not in a good place. And I actually think there is, and because I really believe in the humanity and the kindness of people. But we can't sort of just think through and hope through things that things will be better without doing anything. And really, it's my hope in my presentation that you get some ideas on how we can really affect change that really is necessary for us. But before that, I want to tell you a little bit myself. So I grew up in the Philippines, as Dr. Fernando said. I was born around martial law when we were ruled by a dictator. Early on in my life, I understood how important freedom is, right? The ability to um, self-determine and be able to do what I wanted to do. Not obviously at 2 years old, but really thought about that in sort of my community. My parents, I would consider, are middle class. One of the things that really I am grateful for them is their push for me to say that education is really important. That to be successful, being informed is really an important achievement. Um, while we grew up as middle class, I remember many times sitting on the dinner table where my mom would worry about how to pay bills. And while I'll never really experienced poverty, I knew and understood and heard throughout my growing up how one's worry about finances can really impact their own health and mental health. We are very fortunate, though, that all of my siblings were able to go to college, have their own sort of career, and also not just their achievement of being able to kind of change the world has really embedded growing up. And so my younger brother, which is on the lap of my dad, is an artist in Chicago and continues to volunteer to give away his art for nonprofits, for example. And actually, he's doing a campaign with Pentel America right now. And I'm that young person sitting on my mom's lap. In addition to also about education, I understood growing up in martial law how important it is to see how important the connection is with our community. That if one person or one community or one family is suffering, that actually affects a whole community. And so I have grown up really believing that it is my responsibility to be a change agent to help people so that their lives will be better. I too, like many people, have been touched by the kindness of strangers and the kind of love and kindness and appreciation for folks that really would not get anything from helping me out. But they took a chance on me and really gave me the opportunities probably that I would have never had if no one had set aside and say, I'm going to help this person out. So my goal really as a psychologist and as an administrator is to really help give all that back for people, especially the ones that are less fortunate or at high risk. And I have been hopefully trying my best to be able to do that every day. So I want to show you this picture, really what sort of the reality that sort of I'm facing and many people in the United States are sort of facing, right? This sort of racial injustice, COVID, global change, climate change, the wildfires, poverty, the problem of isolation and people not being connected, um, state-sanctioned violence, police brutality, and also feeling where immigrants are sort of really included in many of these conversations. And so what I'm going to say this morning as I'm talking about it, this is really shaped by the lens um, that I've experienced and grown up, both growing up in the Philippines and coming in my mid-20s as I become and have embraced, hopefully, my role, not just as a change agent, but as a human being. There are many lenses, obviously, to address these issues, but this is just one lens to I see the world. But before I actually continue talking about what we can do, I want to ask the question, well, how do you think we got here? How do we find ourselves in this situation with their 1.29 million deaths for COVID? Many people, we have a racial injustice in actually not just in this country, but actually in many countries, that we are now faced with the climate change that really is putting us at risk to be able, if our species can survive. And so I actually, over time, have grown to realize that there are actually, in my opinion, two explanations. One is from the work by John Powell, which is the executive director of the Otherness and Belonging Institute here in UC Berkeley. And John Powell really talks about how in the history of mankind that we've denied our belongingness and connection to ourselves, to other people, and to nature. That over the many, many centuries that we've created a sense of belongingness to some people and an otherness to others. Right? So whatever that definition is, whether it's the color of your skin, your social class, your age, right? That we've created sort of that otherness and belongingness. That it is so powerful that we've created this otherness and belongingness that we've actually disconnected ourselves, our true selves, from who we are because of what society claims that we need to be. So we've disconnected to our own authenticity. That in addition to that, we've denied ourselves to other people, that there really is a connection with other people, even if we have a different skin color or intellectual capability or age, right? That we've denied it, and so we're treating them differently. And that more importantly, we've denied our connection to nature. And that's why we're in with where we at, that we have this notion that we will conquer nature to suffice or to actually produce, right, everything that's possible so that we can get wealthy, for example, right? So that we really disconnected ourselves from nature. And this belongingness or otherness have actually created some hierarchies. And when we talk about hierarchies, we talk about who has access to those resources and power, who gets to decide what your fate is, whether you can work or not, whether you are considered property or not, whether you're considered to be able to have the opportunity to vote, the right to vote or not. And thus it also created an us and them. And that when you see yourself or when you consider yourself as us, that you get the perks of that power and that privilege. But when you don't see or you're not considered as part of us, you get to be delegated or relegated to either a lower sense of hierarchy. So this otherness and belongingness has actually pushed us to what we're seeing now globally, actually, not just in the United States. And here's this sort of interesting fact, right? And I'm thinking the sense of the hierarchy and power are actually producing some changes in the brain functionality that we actually have to do a better job becoming more empathic to folks that we consider are very different from us. So in 2017, in The Atlantic, an author by the name of Jerry Osim said that there was a study in Canada and parts of the United States where they asked people to go under the transcranial magnetic stimulation, and they gave them sort of a sense of power. Like, I mean, what um, sort of a stimulation, a simulation, right? That people were actually given a sense of power, made feel powerful, and that we actually have a normal capacity in our brain called mirroring, right? The ability for us to mirror, that when somebody in front of us is showing loneliness or sadness, that um, ordinarily we would be able to sort of mimic that facial expression so that there is empathy there. But according to Jerry and Seam and the study that they saw in Canada and parts of the United States, that people that are given some level of power actually decrease that ability to have those mirroring neurons fire, right? So it actually takes away that empathic capability because we see them as either different from us or we see that we are better than them. And so I'm thinking if there's a brain functionality that pushes us away from each other, we're kind of in trouble. Actually, too, when we think about it, that actually our brain functionality changes. It's not just what we're thinking about it, but our actually brain mirroring capability decreases over time, the higher we up in the scale or the more power that we have. So as leaders, as people who actually can make an impact, we think about what we can do to create more empathy, to learn more empathy, to really pay attention to how we can relate to other people. And again, as John Powell said, that really is about belonging and otherness. The other thing that really I'm trying to really absorb more and to explain where we are is the work of Dr. Rupa Marya. And Dr. Marya is an infectionist or infection medicine doctor at UCSF in San Francisco, UCSF. And she actually talks about that we are where we're at because we have been disconnected and disintegrated to the earth, right? To other people, and again, to ourselves. And again, if you notice, it's pretty much the same what John Powell is saying. But actually, Dr. Maria talks about this disconnection from the earth, from other people, and within ourselves is actually manifested in our bodies through chronic stress, dot. And now we're seeing this as forms of inflammation in the body. So in the beginning of medicine, where they started talking about the causes of diseases, that started from the germ, like the germ theory, right? We're now in the 21st century that what medicine is trying to address, like diabetes, stroke, right, hypertension, are all products of inflammation, or the pathogenesis of all of that has a lot to do with inflammation. And Dr. Maria goes even further that says this inflammation is actually caused by the trauma and chronic stress, not just in the present moment, but historical and generational trauma that have never been resolved over time. And examples of these stress and trauma really is a product of colonization, right? And Dr. Rupa Maria explains colonization as the disconnection and disintegration to nature, each other, and ourselves. So actually, when the first white settlers came to the United States and conquered and colonized the United States, right? It really pushed the indigenous people to be disconnected to their land. It also pushed the indigenous people to be disconnected to culture as we try to put them in boarding school. And then also as they brought in and forced African to be slaves in this country. And that their cultures are burned, them being seen as property, um, slaves as being seen as less than, and not being able to sort of practice their own culture and embrace their culture. So all of these things actually are causing what we're seeing now in our body. And according to Dr. Maria, this is a product of colonization. And part of colonization is also seeing that I am much more supreme than you, right? That I'm much better than you. Or, and it's seen in the process of capitalization or capitalism, meaning I'm going to continue, trying to accumulate wealth no matter at what expense. And Dr. Maria actually talks about white supremacy, also talks about patriarchy. So when we talk about white supremacy, it's the ideology of whiteness, not just being a white person, but the standards that we hold ourselves up to is the standard of whiteness. And then also patriarchy, that the standard of what we think is right, positive, is compared to a male or male type or male dominated ideology, right? And we talk about gender inequality. But more importantly, also human supremacy, that we don't care about human nature. All we are interested in is to cut down the forest so that we can sell them and build houses, that we create more manufacturing um, corporations that emit carbon emission, right? The carbon emission, not really caring that it's really affecting many of our communities, that we have high rates of asthma in certain parts of the globe or certain parts of the country. So this connection continues to create some inflammation that really affects our body. And we actually can see this now through our genes. So Dr. Maria talks about that there have been numerous studies that we look at the genetic cap, right? The end of the chromosomes, which is that red pinkish part of the chromosomes. And usually, when we are born, that really is bright red pinkish. But we know, though, through many, many studies, that if you are affected by either disease, that pinkish thing starts to take away its rosiness, right? And it actually, the telomeres shorten over time. So the telomeres tell us how well or how young or how healthy you are. And the shorter the telomeres actually talk about, or the shorter telomeres show that there are many, many issues or health issues because of that shorter length. And again, as Dr. Maria talks, cancer, stroke, vascular dementia, cardiovascular disease, obesity, osteoporosis, or physical manifestations of that, diminishing telomere are all against multiple pathogenesis, but similar path of inflammation. But then also, many studies are now coming out to talk about telomeres are also reduced by poverty, education, safety stress, our ability to feel safe in our own neighborhoods, in our work, Negative social actions, so racism, discrimination, homophobia, ableism, right? Low neighborhood satisfaction, that the neighborhood that you belong to or live don't feel uh, thriving, right? Don't feel safe. A sense of hopelessness, and also again obesity. All of these are social stressors. So not just the physical manifestation or not just the physical causes, but actually social stressors is affecting our body. That so you might be actually middle class now, right? But you probably will seeing some markers of poor health because of the generational trauma that maybe your ancestors or your great grandparents that have experienced over time that has never been resolved or is not resolved. So all of that I think is really a good explanation of where we at and why we're here. And when I think about that, it really sort of behooves me to think about what can I do differently and what can I do in my role, not just as an administrator, as a psychologist, but also as a human being that deeply relies on other people to thrive. And then I started asking the question, is there really any hope? Right? And the psychologist in me says, well, of course, right? You work with people that have undue stress, are unwell, are really in kind of the deepest well, and still come to you and try to seek services, for example. That there are many people who are really going through rough, and that's what we try to do: provide a sense of hope, provide a sense of connection, so that people feel supported to do something better and change their lives. So, in my opinion, there are actually three things that we can do, right, to really provide some hope, not just to ourselves, but for other people. And I would clarify that or classify that in three things. One, having radical hope. Two, really embracing love. And it's sort of interesting that when I was actually growing up, many people didn't talk about love. They talk about data quite a bit, but not many people talked about love. And as I really embraced the importance of love in what we do, at the end of the day, whether you're a data geek or a policy wonk or somebody who's just a paper pusher, right? At the end of the day, our notion is that we're helping others because we love people, the humanity of people. And then the last one, which I think is really helping me understand what we need to do, is transformative justice, right? Not just regular justice, which we'll talk about, but really a justice that transforms the lives of people to be more hopeful and to have the agency and hopefulness to make change. So let me explain what I mean by radical hope. Radical hope believes that there is a steadfast belief in the collective capacity contained in the work of mostly communities of color, but I actually feel like it's everybody. That we have the collective capacity and the hopefulness to feel that we can heal and that we can transform negative experiences, oppressive issues, oppressive forces into something that's totally different, right? Even with overwhelming odds. When everybody's saying there's no hope for you, things are not going to change, that we have that hopefulness that no matter what happens, things can change. Mosley talks about radical hope as being a belief, right? What we think, what's possible, but also talking about a sense of pride and desire to actually do something different, sort of a feeling, an affect. You can't be hopeful with just having cognition, right? Intellectual hopefulness without feeling it, without feeling a sense of affect. And you can't be successful in your sort of hopefulness or sustain your hopefulness without feeling like I have some concrete steps that I can do to make things different. Mostly talks about the model, and as I'm really bringing in understanding what radical hope is, Mosley talks about two components of radical hope. One, faith and agency, the belief that something is bigger than us, and the agency and the capability saying that I can make something different, I can do something, I have that determination. The other part is collective memory, right? Collective memory me goes back to not just me in the present, but actually me in relationship to the history of my people, the history of what was hopeful for them, and then also the challenges and the barriers that they had to overcome. And according to Mosley, that there are actually four pathways, right? Four pathways that include one looking at the past, or one half looking at the past, and also one looking at the present. The four pathways are really understanding what's our history, right? The history of our oppression and our resistance. White settlers came here because they wanted to leave the sort of oppression in England, right? Many immigrants have left their countries because they want a better life, right? And the discrimination that they faced, even when they came to this country, for example. But also having an ancestral pride, pride of who you are, no matter sort of what people are saying, even if your culture, your history is burned or gone away. And in terms of the future, envisioning the possibilities, like what could it be like if we are a culture or a community that embraces each other, that there's no sense of otherness, that always there's just all about belonging, that I see myself in you and you see yourself in me. And then more importantly, Mosley talks about having meaning and purpose, like that our lives is really meaningful no matter what. And she said, even if people feel that there really isn't anything that they can do, regaining that sense that even if I am down in the hierarchy, that I can still do something to change one person's life. This sense of hopefulness and meaningfulness and purpose is the drive that we need so that people feel that they are as important as a leader that can change policies and systems, and that even folks that feel like there's that they can do actually needs to be part of that conversation. Mostly talks about the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who, as you know, was was did a lot of work with folks who were at the Holocaust and asking people, knowing that they were going to die in the gas chamber, that many of the folks that he was talking to felt still a sense of hopefulness, knowing that their death is imminent, that in a matter of days that they will be put in those chambers, and had still, as they were dying or going to die, felt a sense of meaningfulness and purpose in their life. Maybe just as a friend or as somebody to hold somebody's hand in that moment. So I really feel good about this sense that there's some radical hopefulness in all of us. And my hope is that you think about that sense of hopefulness that you do too. And in my opinion, when we think about hopefulness, I think about sort of the images that I have grown up again in the Philippines and also coming here to this country about sort of the many oppression that many of our people have experienced. It's also thinking about so many ways that we've been asked, forced to disconnect from our culture. If you just look at some of those pictures in the history of slavery in this country, the one on the bottom right talks about the white settlers really, having war with our indigenous people. The two upper pictures are pictures of actually in the Philippines. One when the Spaniards came to colonize the Philippines, and then one on the upper left is Uncle Sam teaching many of its colonized countries, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, the Philippines, and teaching them and educating them to kind of know to have Western knowledge and to be Americanized, right? And this is a part of our history. And there's nothing wrong with embracing that's really part of our history. But as Radical Hope says, it's being able to sort of see the future, embracing this, and really a sense of hopefulness. The other part that I'm really working hard is to understand what justice is all about. And we've used justice when we talk about equity, inclusion, diversity. But I think really what we should be talking about is justice, not just diversity or equity, but it's really about justice. And I define justice is the fair and moral treatment of people. And part of understanding about justice is to know that everyone is affected by unjust systems, right? Everyone is affected by unjust systems because there are such hierarchies, and there again when we talk about who gets to be part of those resources and who gets to belong, and how important that in everything that we do, we think about who's being affected by the decisions that we make. And actually, Congressman John Lewis talks about this this is a picture in the 60s. And he quotes, like so many young people today, I was really searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. And he was talking about the philosophy of discipline of nonviolence. And he said, if we are all complicit, then we tolerate injustice. If we don't say anything, and even the mere act of saying something really talks about helping people fight for justice. He said it's not enough to say it will get better and stand by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up and speak out, no matter at what expense. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. And in many of the spaces that I've been, I've noticed that people actually don't have the courage to speak up. And maybe because I feel inferior, maybe people feel of fear retaliation, many people feel that they don't have a voice. Justice calls for us saying something different, calling out, speaking out, taking a risk and saying, I don't feel right about it. I have questions about it. Who else is missing in this conversation? Who else is being negatively impacted? And then the last one, actually not the last one, but really in addition to that is really transformative justice. Again, not just the moral and fair treatment of people, but really in understanding the effect of oppression that harms people. That for in order for us to really have justice in this world, that we have to have people accountable for what happened, what they did, or what didn't happen, and that we need to change the balance of power there and get people to be accountable and move towards not just fixing, but really to heal, right? But unfortunately, it's easier to talk about justice without talking about sort of all these oppressions. And transformative justice talks about really embracing that oppression, acknowledging the power difference and the privilege and the abuse and the assault, and therefore using that to change the pathway of people. And then the last one, which is actually my favorite, and every time I give a talk about this, people just kind of think about like, I can't believe you're talking about this, but I really feel that what really gets us together is love. And as the easiest definition of love is an intense feeling of deep affection. And for that means it doesn't have to be romantic love or sexual love. It's really just a deep concern for people's well-being. And there's really a great quote that I came from the Interaction Institute, and it says, "Love builds relationships that have a power to shift culture. Love remembers our power, reclaims our history, heals our wounds, and innovates into the future." Can you just imagine if we all embrace that definition of what love is, that the possibility is actually endless, right? Power to reclaim our history, to heal the wounds, no matter how hard or big, painful they are, but actually willing to innovate so that people can thrive or communities can thrive. I want to talk about Alicia Garza and her work, and she is one of the three co-founders of Black Lives Matter. Because many people are really angry, and people say that one of the antithesis of love is actually anger, and she talks about really changing anger quite a bit differently and looking at it as love. That actually having anger for people because of what they did or how we've been abused is actually not a sustainable emotion in itself, but it actually has to be transformed into something with possibility, with deep possibility. And she believes that it's actually to transform that you actually need love, right? And that healing actually from the self through love, you can heal communities and other people. And then one of the scholars in this country, very well known, Cornel West, talks about justice as the public face of love. So if you stand up for people, if you fight for justice, you're actually telling the people that you love them and you care about them deeply. Again, more than sort of the basic humanness, right? That more than that, that there's a deep, intense connection that we are really fighting for. So if all of these, radical hope, transformative justice, love, are interconnected. And I believe that those are the three things that we really need to emerge from this crisis. So what do we need to transform where we are? We really need collective efforts to change power, address power, understand economy or economics, that there is a hierarchy that we're all part of, and to understand how we are as cultural beings, that we have multiple identities, multiple experiences, multiple perspectives, that we can disagree with other people and still be having kind relationships with them, loving relationships with them. That we really need to drive ourselves to create a structure that's totally different from what we had been for all these centuries, that focuses on community safety because there is love, focusing on economic security because there's justice and we care for the well-being of other people, that they have the resources that they need. But more importantly, according to Dr. Butler, is to weave people in the kind of healing to make them feel whole. Because the otherness and the belongingness and the social stressors and the colonization and supremacy have broken us into pieces and broken us into categories. That because you're privileged in this way and you're not privileged in that way, because your skin color is this way, because you're female or identify as female, that you actually are broken pieces and not seen as one whole being. That's the transformation that we need in our time. So, what are the four things that we can do as I'm sort of ending? And there are many things that we can do, and I want to just leave you with four things. One is to build social movements. Social movements decentralize power and privilege. It gives more people the ability to be change agents and have the self determination to decide what they want with their life. To shift also when we think about building social movements, to stop this urgency based thinking of like everything is in crisis, but doing some slow, intentional work, being mindful of the present, the future, and also the past. That always operating in crisis actually puts us in a higher risk of making really poor decisions. That we should move using the speed of trust, that everything should be based on trust, and trust is earned, and that we from the get-go invest in building trust, not just with each other but with communities, even the people that we don't like, and that we will build so much resiliency if we invest in relationships. Number two, shift from scarcity thinking to abundance thinking. Instead of asking, what will I give up? What will I give up if I have to, or what will I lose if I give up power? What will I lose if I, you know, charge more taxes or have to pay more taxes? Is asking actually the question, what do we gain by being in solidarity with one another? What do we gain when we're in relationship with people? What do we gain because we're in the same community together? Shifting from, I'm going to hold on to whatever I have because I don't know how many more I have, to really saying, I have a lot to gain if we share resources together. Adrienne Marie Brown, who's one of really a really great community organizer, had this quote that I really love. And she says that every piece of the community holds the pieces of the solution. And that if everybody is engaged, that we can see them in all the different levels of work. So no one is dispensable, actually. Even the people that we don't like or don't want to be part of this movement or don't want to make a difference has a role in changing people's lives. That therefore it is our role to try to engage others, even if they disagree with us, to see what is possible. And this quote tells me I have to work hard, really connecting with people, because that's really the magic bullet, connection with people. The third one, and I think this is the hardest, is seek out those who aren't like you. We are in the Facebook era that if you don't like somebody and what their comment on Facebook is, you dislike them or you unfriend them. Or we know though because of social media and the algorithm, they try to figure out what you're interested in and they just show you everything that's sort of within your way of thinking, within your preferences. And actually what we need is to seek people who are unlike us, because there's so much to grow. There's so much to learn. There's so much conversation that needs to happen. There's so much creativity that's being lost if we don't seek out people who are different than us. John Powell talks about seeking out and listening for care in people is really what we need to do. And when we seek out other people, it's not to convince them of what we think or what's important for us. It's really to just listen what their perspective is and why their experience is different than ours. And that at some point in time, we will recognize the shared humanity that we have forgotten or forced to forget. And that these bridges of discomfort and connection actually can help people thrive and heal. And then the last one, which is provided by Luvia Jai, she says, more than any time in history, it is important to build bridges. And building bridges actually for her, especially when she's searching for people who are unlike her, she asks the question whether she wants to confront people or engage people in a dialogue. She asks herself three questions, right? In her truth telling about her experience and her truth telling about why she believes in a certain way, she asks herself, do I mean it? Right? Am I going to say something that I really feel deeply about? Can I defend it, meaning that it's part of my experience, that I have some either data or facts, right, that it's impacted me? But more importantly, she says, by saying this, am I saying it because I love them as a person in humanity? And she says if she's able to answer these three questions before speaking up or confronting or engaging people in dialogue, then she will take a risk and do it, even if she knows that there's a possible risk there. Did I say it with love? Did I mean it because of love? Is the third question. Radical hope, love, transformative justice, really for me are what's going to help us move to the 22nd century maybe and help us really change the path of people. But more important, so I really am hopeful that things can be different and really feel inspired that people will actually do something to make things different. I want to end by sharing you what has actually kept me or has kept me going. Benigno Aquino was assassinated in the 80s. You know, he was a senator that was really fighting against the dictatorship in the 70s under Marcos. I mean, he had this lovely quote. I grew up and I really read it, and for some reason it sort of spoke to me. And he says, "I will never be able to forgive myself if I will have to live with the knowledge that I could have done something and I did not do anything." And for me, that's how I just live my life. I'm not perfect. You know, I'm a person that constantly grows and constantly hopes to be better. But I know that in every situation and every moment and every interaction, there is something that I can do. Maybe not to change somebody's life, maybe in a small way, maybe in a big way. But I like to think of myself that every day before I go to sleep, I ask myself, did I try to make the world a better place? And my hope is more often than not, I say yes. And so that's also what I want to leave with you is I hope that you think about that you have the power to change people's lives, no matter how small or how insignificant it is, because you do. Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Africa for such a lovely presentation and a message. It's touched me. You can hear it in my voice. It's also very rare to hear another Filipino speak from the heart. So thank you very much. If we could have applause on Zoom, I'm sure we would break the internet right now because you have really touched us with your words. And I just want to say to John Lyons, I think the next iteration of TCOM is transformational justice, hope, and love. So we should think about how we can operationalize that in our work. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just reading some of the comments. There are a million thank yous on here for you, Dr. Africa. This was awesome. It was incredible. The time is now, powerful, lots of applause, very heartfelt. Thank you for your thoughtfulness, wonderful presentation. So I hope you can enjoy reading those comments. They are very well deserved. Thank you so much.